Well, after that episode, the Russels have certainly got war coming towards them on all fronts. Episode 3 of The Gilded Age was recently released, and it's safe to say that its conclusion definitely set up the direction for the rest of the season, and the hostility, yet also the blossoming of new futures for not only the people, but certain individuals specifically is soon to arrive. So with that, let's recap, break down, and explain all that there was to take away from it. Here is The Gilded Age Season 2, Episode 3, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The Russels' demise. It very much seems as though, based on the most recent episode, the Russels are going to be facing the wrath of many as the season goes on. For example, there's internal conflict that's present between Bertha and George following the revelation of what happened between him and Miss Turner. The external battle of the Metropolitan versus the Academy and the people needing to side with one. The Union versus George and the fact that his workforce looks set to turn against him. Mrs. Winterton versus Bertha and the potential for her to reveal information about George. And also the public versus the Russells, when the possibility of Larry being with Mrs. Blaine gets revealed. It's very much pitted against them, and there are multiple threats that need to be contained, albeit if most of them have been ignited by themselves. The Met versus the Academy was something which took the center stage again in this episode when it was revealed that the Met was planning on disrupting society even more by announcing that they were going to be having their opening nights on the same night that the Academy was going to be having their show, making it clear that the people needed to pick a side. This is one of the main things that the season is building towards, and with us hearing that the Metropolitan would most likely never amount to any success in the lifetimes of Bertha and Mrs. Winterton, and it's seeming like in the next episode the pot of money that they were relying on in the short term to garner some attention was running dry. We could see Bertha feel as though her project could be on the cusp of coming to an end. The show is all about status, family name, and trying to ensure that one's name is as prominent and in the limelight of society as much as possible. And with it looking like the Russell name is going to be dragged through the mud because of Larry's time, and also if Mrs. Winterton decides to announce that she had a bit of an intimate time with George Russell, then that paired with the pot of money coming to an end, it could mark troubling times for the Russells. It's an arm of the story that's most definitely an interesting one to follow. Peggy's trip down south. Following the death of Peggy's son, we saw that she'd been struggling with her general existence, and her returning to work for Agnes Van Ryn was one of the main things that took her mind off of things. However, alongside that, she was working for Mr. Fortune as a journalist. Within this episode, we saw that there was a project that was going to be taking place down south, a place where Peggy had never been before. But regardless of that, she put herself forward to go with Mr. Fortune, so that she could document the people that are wanting to improve their lives and are succeeding in doing so. The only issue with this is that it poses a massive threat for Peggy. Peggy's family knew what it was like to be down south during the time where black people were enslaved, and that's also why they chose to leave the south and head towards New York. Mr. Fortune, her boss, was also enslaved when he was down in the south before leaving. So he'd been exposed to the mindset of people back then and the horrific ways of life. However, with Peggy not experiencing it firsthand and only hearing firsthand accounts, I feel with Dorothy being extremely fearful of her going there and saying to her about not looking white folk in the eye, not leaving the group and keeping her mouth shut, they could be things which could be foreshadowing and laying down the foundation for something to go wrong when she does visit Mr. Washington. This is set around 15 to 20 years after the American Civil War, and I imagine the mindset of people doesn't just change that quickly. So I think that's something that may end up going wrong for Peggy when she's down south, but I guess we'll see with that. Ada and Reverend Forte. I feel the story of Ada finding love was something which had its foundations laid down to us in the first episode of this season when she was talking to Marion and saying how she never found love in her life or the right person to marry. From that moment on, in came Reverend Luke Ford, who was pretty much in the same position as what she was, never married but had a large heart and a lot of love to give, hence why we've gradually seen them grow closer over the first 3 episodes. With him going over for a luncheon and being served the chowder that he so desperately craved since moving there, it was one of the first acts of romance and care from Ada. With the episode finishing off with the both of them in the art gallery for an artist that they cared for the work of, and Marion accompanying Ada there so that Agnes didn't think something suspicious was going on, I feel we're going to see them growing closer, and Ada might end up having a happily ever after. That's if her sister doesn't stand in the way of her. Watson's offer to leave. There was another moment in this episode where we saw a story that's been building since the first episode reaching a mini climax. This was Mr. Watson and the fact that he's Mrs. McNeil's father and Mr. McNeil's father-in-law, sticking to the theme of wanting to prevent social status from changing, and learning that Mr. Watson was in fact a server. It would damage the reputation of the McNeils and everything that they've built throughout their lives. With Mr. McNeil leading the way, he put an offer to Watson where he offered him the opportunity to go to the West Coast where there'd be an apartment paid for, he'd have a cook and a server, and live a rather comfortable life. This would be so that he'd stay away from Mrs. McNeil and never speak to his daughter again. Watson is under the impression that she is aware of the deal and basically gave it her approval. However, from what we saw, it didn't seem like she was. So I feel this is a deal that could end up coming back to get Mr. McNeil, as deep down she may be upset at the fact that she may never get to see her father again if he moves away. With Watson truly caring about his daughter, but knowing full well that he could jeopardize their position in society if the information were to be revealed, he may end up leaving, and doing it with the intention of making sure that she doesn't feel the weight of what the leak could bring. Mrs. Blaine and Larry Russell. There's something really interesting going on with Larry and Mrs. Blaine. There was a moment in the previous episode where it looked like she was looking over at Larry with somebody else, and there could have been some kind of jealous streak within her, but I thought nothing of it. However, in this episode there was another moment that was similar. She basically implied that Larry had a mistress in a jokey way and that he was seeing somebody else on the side. Whilst this is only small, I think this could be us getting drip-fed clues as to the type of person that she actually is. We may see her character take a dark turn as the season develops as she gets more and more infatuated with Larry. It's something that I've definitely got my eye on. Overall review. I thought this was a good episode of the show. I think it was definitely the episode in the season where afterwards things are now going to take a turn from this moment on, and we're going to see the repercussions and consequences of certain actions taking effect. I think Peggy's story is going to get a whole lot more interesting as she's set to enter a place which could be dangerous for her. Plus, I'm also looking forward to seeing the Russells having a load of trouble to deal with, because it is truly coming from all fronts. The world that's been created is something which is so believable, and being transported back to that time is a real pleasure to witness because it all does feel so real when you're watching it. With trouble looking like it's on the horizon, I'm looking forward to seeing where it's going to go. So, there you have it, The Gilded Age Season 2 Episode 3, Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos such as Endings Explained, theories and predictions and character breakdowns, then click on the I button. Or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of this episode? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.